Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the WEIM Governance Review Committee Stakeholder Meeting. Please note that all audience audio connections will be muted until the Q&A portion of the call. We will give you instructions on how to ask questions at that time. With that, I'll turn the call over to Burton Gross, Deputy General Counsel at the California ISO. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is just a quick sound check. Can you hear me, operator? Okay, looks like people can hear me. Thank you for coming today for our GRC meeting. I'm going to cover a couple of procedural items, and then I will turn the substance of the meeting over to Rebecca Wagner. So the first item on the agenda is, as is usually the case, we offer an opportunity for public comment, if there is any, on any matters that are not on the agenda for today. So to be clear, there will be opportunity for public comment on the agenda items during the course of the call. But if there are any other public comments beforehand, this would be the time for that. So operator, if you could check for any public comments.
If you have a public comment, please press the raised hand icon on the bottom of your screen to enter the question queue. You will be unmuted when it is your turn. A pop-up message will appear and you will need to accept the unmute message to become unmuted. If you are on the phone-only line, please dial #2 to enter the verbal queue. There are currently no hands in the queue at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. The next item, and probably actually it should have been the first item, candidly, is for me to now call the attendance for the GRC. So I'll start first with the voting members in alphabetical order, and then I will move on to the two non-voting members. Members, please be sure you come off mute to say that you're here. Starting with Michelle Beck.
Here.
Tony Braun.
Here.
I believe Suzanne Cooper is not able to make it today, so I won't call her. Eric Eisenman.
Here.
Jeff Nelson.
Present.
Amanda Ormond.
Here.
Pam Sporborg.
Here.
Thank you. Lisa Tawney.
Here.
I also believe Rob Taylor is not going to be with us today, so I'll move on to Rebecca Wagner.
Here.
And Cameron Yurkowski.
I'm here.
Now for the non-voting members, is Angelina Glitova. Are you here yet?
Present.
Okay. And John Prescott.
Here.
Thank you. So we have a quorum, and that means we can proceed to the next item of business, which is the approval of the September 23rd, 2022 general session minutes. And for this, we will just be involving the voting members. So if I could get a motion and then a second to approve the September 23rd, 2022 minutes, that would be great. Is there a motion?
I move.
I'll count that as Eric. And is there a second?
Pam will second.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll just go through the voting roll. Michelle Beck.
Aye.
Tony Braun.
Aye.
Eric Eisenman.
Aye.
Jeff Nelson.
Aye.
Amanda Ormond.
Aye.
Pam Sporborg.
Aye.
Lisa Tawney.
Aye.
Rebecca Wagner.
Aye.
And Cameron Yurkowski.
Aye.
Okay, with that, the minutes are approved, and I can now turn it over to you, Rebecca, for the substance of the call. Thank you.
Thanks, Bert. Welcome, everyone.
We'll go ahead and get started on a review of our revised proposal for governance. Can we advance the slide, please? And on to the next one. I'm just going to pause here for a second to acknowledge the passing of our friend and colleague, Therese Hampton. She passed away late September unexpectedly, and I think we're all still feeling that loss, and certainly the loss of her leadership and enthusiasm for the work we're doing today. The Governance Review Committee is rallied and is working hard to finish the work with the dedication and enthusiasm that Therese has led us so far on, and we intend to make her proud. So I didn't want to go without acknowledging our special friend, and I miss her every day, especially on days like this. Next slide, please. This is basically looking at where we've been, and I would note that we published the straw proposal in July, and we received stakeholder feedback, both in terms of written comments and stakeholder meetings and individual outreach, which has led us to the revised proposal, which was issued on October 31st. And just recognizing where we're at in the process is that we are in refinement mode. We are heading to the conclusion of this very long and not so challenging effort, though COVID has certainly presented some obstacles for getting our work complete, but we are on track. Next slide. So as I just noted, the revised proposal reflects all of the stakeholder comments, what we've heard from you all in the workshops and through our outreach efforts. What we're going to do today is walk through our latest refinements. And of course, the sun is coming out now. And I'll be joined by some of our other members of the GRC to cover the Joint Authority and Advisory Authority. We're going to do that first, and we'll pause for questions. And then we'll cover the balance of the presentation and then go to questions on that section. And finally, next steps. Next slide, please. So at a very high level, the recommendations for delegation of authority and the related topics include the type of authority. We're not proposing any changes to the joint authority construct, scope of the authority and advisory authority. We have a couple of proposed enhancements. Decisional classification, one of the key components of our overall structure of governance, is not changing, and nor is the dispute resolution component. All of those will be staying intact, but we appreciate the thoughtful comments that we have received. And in reviewing the revised proposal, you'll see our inclinations and support for maintaining our original proposal. Next slide, please. I'm not going to read this slide to you, and I'm sure you're grateful, but this is the new and improved definition for joint authority. Next slide. And this definition is broken down into three components. One is the extension of the existing apply to test that is used in the energy imbalance market. The second component is a new piece that we'll go into more depth on that addresses any changes in the formation of locational marginal prices that are common for EIM and EDAM products. And then the third piece is that all other Cal ISO BA specific rules are excluded. Next slide, please. So this I'm going to cover because this is the simplest of the governance or the delegation of authority proposal within scope. This is the same test for EIM. Here, this piece of the definition is only changing to reflect EDAM and a W in front of EIM. And for the most part, we had broad stakeholder support for this. And I think as we are watching joint authority unfold in real time, I think there's a lot of support for this new approach with the governing body and the Board of Governors. So with the next slide, I will turn this over to Jeff Nelson, who will cover our first modification to the definition under the scope of authority. Jeff, are you ready?
I'm ready. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to read a portion of this and then sort of dissect it. So this is an expansion of what was in the previous proposal, and I'll try to articulate the thinking that was around it. But if we get about halfway through the sentence, there's joint authority to change or establish any tariff rule for the day-ahead or real-time markets that directly establishes or changes the formation of any locational marginal prices for a product that's common to the overall WEIM or EDAM market. So I'm going to break this down into components. It's got pieces here. So first, what we're talking about is rules that are going to change or establish formation of prices. So this could include sort of special rules that might apply, let's just say, for example, to the ISO only, but it's only for products that are common to the WEIM or EDAM markets. So let's say that the ISO had a special rule that was going to be applied to imbalance reserve up that was only going to apply to California. And that rule was going to directly establish or change the formation of a locational marginal price. I mean, just for example, if they had a hard cap only in California, I'm just making things up, of $200 for imbalance reserves up, and it only was applicable to California, well, we'd see that that was a rule that was directly establishing or changing the formation of locational marginal prices, because now the price can't go above 200. And it's for a product that is common to the entire WEIM or EDAM market. In this case, imbalance reserve is going to be common to the entire EDAM footprint. So under this expansion, even though that rule would only apply to entities in the ISO, so it would fail the applies to test, it would now pass the directly establishes or changes the formation of a marginal price for a common product. That rule would now fall under joint authority. And that's an expansion beyond what was discussed in the previous paper, the original proposal. Some of the thinking behind this was, although it uniquely applied to a single product or a single balancing authority in this example, it applied to common products. And the common products are commonly optimized within the entire footprint. And this could, because it's a common product, have impacts on the price formation of products outside of the directly impacted balancing authority. So although the rules don't apply, the price formation and mechanics of a common product were viewed as substantially integrated, that it was appropriate to move this to joint authority. Now, for clarity, this would not apply to something like if the ISO, who only has ancillary services, put in new rules for ancillary service price formation. Again, let's just say they put a hard cap in for the regulation up. Again, I'm just making things up. That regulation up is not a common product to the market. Regulation is exclusive to the ISO's balancing authority. And because it's not a common product, even though it is a rule that's potentially directly establishing or changing locational marginal prices, that product's not common, and that rule would not be subject to joint authority. It would remain under the exclusive purview of the CalISO board. So there was a lot of discussion on this. This is enhancement. I'll just say right now, I'm not aware of any sort of direct rules that are in play that this would apply to, but it's not clear how the rules will evolve or if special rules will be needed for individual balancing authorities, rules that are not applying to all members of the Western Imbalance Market or EDAM, but only specific members in the future. Okay, so I'll pause there. And one other sort of clarification. In addition to, like I said, ISO may have products that are unique to its balancing authority. There may be products that are not actually part of the EIM or EDAM. And for example, if someone's doing a export out of the ISO's market that was not, it's an export, it's not a transfer, it's an export, not going to another EDAM entity, but going outside of EDAM. Well, that is not part of the EDAM market. That is a rule that applies only to the ISO's market, not to the EDAM market. And those rules would not be subject to joint authority either. Okay, so let me pause there. I don't know how we're handling this, if we're going to take questions at the end or if we want to pause for questions at this point.
Thanks, Jeff. What we'll do is go through the next slides with Tony and Letha, and then we'll pause for questions. So, Tony, you're up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. We have moved on to the next slide. So first of all, I'd like to extend our appreciation to all the stakeholders that have ridden this rather lengthy process through with us. Obviously, the scope of joint authority has been by leaps and bounds the largest focus and the most difficult issue to grapple with and dice finally as we're trying to finalize this. We are trying to reach an end. We have a schedule for the EDAM market that includes a detailed briefing, as my understanding is in December, with the board decision item early next year. And so we are trying to keep this on track. I think also inherent in any of these discussions is we are threading a needle. The EDAM is neither fish nor fowl, right? It's not a real-time market and it's not an RTO. And things that are accomplished in the CAISO using market functionality that sometimes are accomplished for similar types of products or services or just functions in other EIM entities and BAs and TOPs through a set rule or through whatever inherent authorities they're operating under. And so parsing this out sometimes can be imprecise. But I would say that I think we have tried to extend this an extra increment to capture some concerns that we heard from stakeholders. And we know it's not going to be perfect, and we know it's not going to be the last word. It might be the last word for the GRC, but it won't be the last word for the evolution of this discussion. And we're going to learn a lot going forward as the market operates, and we wish we would have done something different. So I'd like to at least put all this discussion in that lengthy context there. So exclusion, we've always talked about joint authority as not including CAISO BA rules. And so I think there are, so the second part of this new phrase makes that clear that there are CAISO specific rules that would be not covered by joint authority. We've talked in the past that there are several what we think are clear examples. CPM, for example, that is the back for those decoding the acronyms, that is the backstop procurement mechanism the CAISO uses for part of its capacity backstop functionality. RMR, reliability must run designations, which are another component in backstop procurement mechanisms that the CAISO has within its tariff. There are a host of RA rules, and of course, sometimes the RA rules have market rules associated with them, but the resource adequacy rules are not included within this construct as we intended. And then, of course, we have CRRs. So we have revenue transfers and things like that. But we do not have CRRs within EDM. And so these apply only to the CAISO controlled grid or the CAISO balancing authority area and the entities within. And so those are clearly, we're trying to articulate that those are clearly excluded. It's our view that the BA specific transmission priority rules are also not joint authority rules, and that because we've always operated from a principle, attempt at a principle of sometimes articulated as parity, sometimes articulated as symmetry, where rules that BAs set for themselves or transmission service providers outside of the CAISO set for themselves, and they may affect the EDM, they may affect the EIM, but they are BA specific transmission priority rules. And so it is not our intention to include those in this joint authority articulation. So we've done our best. We understand, again, hearkening back to my long intro remark, that sometimes the ISO uses a market for accomplishing some of these things, a market tool. But we think when you go to the base function, we hope this is and we believe this is a functional rule that we can create a pretty clear distinction between what we think is joint and what we think is outside of joint. Recognize again that I think, within the first months of operation, we're going to look at something that comes up. And so we would hope that everyone understands and takes that into account when they're shaping their, how they approach these matters.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks for the introduction. That was a very good level set, and I appreciate you doing that for us. Next slide. And I will turn it over to Commissioner Tawny.
Thanks so much, and thanks to my fellow presenters for running through the evolving scope of authority. The complement to the scope of joint authority is the advisory authority role. And what we've tried to articulate is that advisory authority, and there's no fundamental change in this proposal around what advisory authority would incorporate, sort of everything else in the real-time or day-ahead market, the Western EIM governing body or EDM governing body at that point would be invited to provide advisory input in the format that they saw fit. We did suggest in this straw proposal or this revision that 2 process steps be added to really, I think, cement how seriously the governing body already takes that advisory authority role. We've seen that when they have advisory authority rather than joint authority, that they engage just as deeply in the content. They think through the issues and take input across the West, just as they do for a decision that they have joint authority over. And so to sort of procedurally bake that culture in and to elevate the advisory authority, we have suggested that the advisory input be provided in a joint general session of both bodies when, in particular, the governing body is poised to ask the CAISO board to turn down a proposal. And so really to require that conversation to happen face-to-face, or as face-to-face as Zoom allows, but to engage that constructive solution-oriented conversation that we see the two boards really building together in joint authority and making space for that when there is something very difficult that the governing body feels should not be moving forward. Similarly, if the board goes ahead and approves a proposal for filing at FERC regardless, then the governing body would be able to use outside counsel or other independent support. It might not be counsel, it might be an economist or another position to prepare a written statement of its opposition for submission at FERC so that FERC can weigh why the advisory opinion has visibility into the advisory opinion. That advisory opinion can be fully fleshed out before it's submitted, recognizing that sometimes these processes are moving relatively quickly, and that FERC can really consider and weigh the reasoning in the advisory opinion that brought the boards into conflict. And so I think this is an effort to really articulate and give due to the governing body as they engage very seriously in issues across the whole real-time and day-ahead market, and to recognize that there is significant impact, even though an impact test alone is very difficult to operate under. And so trying to address that with the advisory authority. And I think those are the high points. Some more detail is in the written document, of course. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll take this time because we just covered a lot in 3 little slides. And I want to present the opportunity to the folks on the phone, our stakeholders, to ask questions and get any kind of clarification and provide any thoughts. We'll also do a seek input after the next section. So if you think of something later, you'll still have another shot. So if we could open the lines for stakeholders for questions.
To enter the question queue, you can press the raise hand icon on the bottom of your screen. You will be unmuted when it's your turn. A pop-up message will appear and you will need to accept the unmute message to become unmuted. If you're on the phone only line, please dial #2 to enter the question queue. We have had a few questions come in. When you state your question, please also state your name and affiliation.
Hey, this is Michelle Keto from the CPUC. I have a couple of questions. Could we go back to slide 11? Is there another slide 11? Maybe the one before this? Slide 10? Yeah, slide 10. Okay, so I just wanted to ask a few questions about the expansion of the authority. So the frame that I want to put us in mind is the penalty provisions for exports. So as you recall, as a result of the 2021 summer enhancements, CAISO changed the penalty parameters associated with export priorities. And so under the current WEIM rules, those export penalty parameters were not within scope, given the applies to test. So then my question is, would they be in scope because of this new provision that directly establishes or changes formation of any locational marginal price? So would they be in scope for joint authority for that? And then I have a bunch of follow-up questions.
I guess it's Jeff here. Hi, Michelle. I'll try to tackle this. It may not be a fully satisfying answer. Penalty parameters are strange beasts. Sometimes they're used to ration or to sequence rather than establish prices. And sometimes they're really used to establish prices. So I think in general, the concept of penalty parameters, it's not going to be clear up front if they directly establish or change the formation of a price, in my view. I think there'll be healthy debate on penalty parameters.
Okay, well,
To the extent,
sorry, go ahead.
yes, yeah, and again, that's my view on this because it gets pretty technical. As far as exports, to the extent that they're non-WEIM or EDAM transactions, those are they're not subject, they're outside of the scope of joint authority, they're ISO exclusive. I think your question was with, could you repeat the specifics you were talking about? I may not be
Sure,
able
I want to
answer
go
that.
through a
Can you repeat it?
few. So I'm talking about the penalty parameters associated with low priority exports out of the CAISO system, because one could argue that it could, I mean, if it directly establishes the locational marginal price, yes, but changes the formation of any locational marginal price. So I'm trying to understand if it would be in scope because of that. And obviously, if the penalty, well, let me just, I've got a bunch of questions and then I have a comment at the end. So you're telling me you don't know the answer to that question?
In my opinion, low priority exports are not part of WEIM or EDAM. Those are exports that are tied outside the market. So it is, in my opinion, those are not subject to joint authority because they're not a product common to WEIM or EDAM.
And is that the position of the GRC and CAISO as well? Because, you know, what we're going to be doing is writing comments. And I really feel like, you know, all stakeholders need a very clear idea of what we're doing here. I mean, you guys wrote this for a reason. And so I'm just trying to understand the contours of those reasons.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Michelle. And I think it would really be helpful. You know, this issue has come up in some of our initial outreach. And so it would be helpful to get it for you in comments. I agree with Jeffrey's characterization of it. I put it in that category of, you know, the ISO's market uses a market mechanism, if you really want to call these penalty parameters a market mechanism, to do things that other BAs do through command and control. And so I think the underlying function of it is to allocate scarce transmission, which is not intended to be part of JA. But I do think getting that in written comments would be good so that we can, you know, in our final product, respond with more clarity.
Right. So let me just talk a little bit about that, though. If I put those in my written comments, I mean, how will I get an answer, like a public answer to that, since you're going to go to final authority? And that public answer is really going to, you know, feed into how we comment on this initiative and whether we support and the commissioners support this expansion. So I'm having a little trouble seeing how that's going to work.
So help me understand that procedurally, right? So there's going to be a final proposal. We will have comments between now and the final proposal. Help me understand.
Are you going to take comments on the final proposal? Because let's say I say I'm concerned about this. You guys don't answer the question directly in your final proposal. And then we say, well, we don't support it if it's that broad. So where's the feedback loop?
So I'm speaking a lot here, so everyone can jump in. I mean, it doesn't seem to me dissimilar than any other ISO process where a final proposal comes out and then it goes to the board for determination and people show up. So I think that it seems like relatively consistent with the way that CAISO's processes work.
Okay, but so that means we essentially don't get an answer to this in concrete terms. And so we'd have to bring it to the board if our concerns remain. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, and do you guys think you would actually have an answer for me in the final proposal? Or would it still be vague?
Well, this is Rebecca. I think that's impossible to know at this second. But I know that you've raised this issue and the ISO has been working to vet it. You're raising it publicly now. And it clearly is something that needs to be addressed and we can work through. So when we issue our next proposal, we will have another public comment period before we issue our final proposal. So there will be time to address this, and we can continue to work doing some outreach to dig in and get you a more satisfying answer than off the cuff right now.
Okay, well, I just want to say it shouldn't be a surprise since I have raised it previously, but okay, I'd like to talk about a couple of other ones. I want to talk about the wheeling penalty parameters. I have similar issues there. So as you know, that was also discussed in the summer 2020. And the penalty parameters essentially determine what is going to be given lower, equal, or higher priority than load, which is obviously important to California. And so I'm guessing that the same answer you gave with regard to LPT exports, I guess there's two parts. One, does it affect the price formation? And two, are you arguing that it is not a product that's common to the overall WEIM EDAM market? And if you could parse that out, that would be helpful.
So in the second part, yes, I'll argue that the wheel throughs are not a common product. That's my position. They're not a common product, so they're not subject to this. And further, this rationing is something that, back to sort of the parity arguments, each balancing authority determines what transmission it's going to be making available for market use and what transmission it's being needed for its own sort of native use. And nothing in this proposal is supposed to undermine the ISO's ability to continue to do things that I think, as Tony was trying to articulate, are unique to its balancing authority and its sort of balancing authority functions. And that's where I got into a little gray area. To the extent penalty parameters are being done to effectuate that, to effectuate the control of balancing authority functions, those penalty parameters shouldn't be subject to this.
Okay, if I could get confirmation that all the penalty parameters are not subject to this, that would go a long way to alleviating some of my concerns.
Yeah, I we'll have to discuss that as a GRC to see if that is just a simple, quick, and dirty way. I'm not convinced it's quite that simple, but I might be able to be convinced, especially if it adds just clarity to what's going to be in and out.
If it's not clear, that will obviously cause us some great concern. We were supportive of the applies to tests. Now that we've opened it up to the establishes or changes the formation of the LMP, and that potentially implicates the penalty parameters, I think we will oppose it if it did implicate those penalty parameters for the reasons you said, which are, other balancing authorities are able to say what has low priority and what has high priority. And obviously CAISO uses its penalty parameters to effectuate that, which is a reliability function in our mind. And we obviously don't want to compromise our reliability. So we are very concerned about this. And so, our support will depend in part on the answer to those questions. Okay, I have a couple of other questions. Could you give me some examples of something that would directly affect the LMP that would be beyond the applies to test? I mean, I know you guys wrote this for a reason, and I'm just trying to understand the contours of that reason. So if you could give me an example, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I tried to provide an example of like a hard price cap that might be applied to a product in a specific balancing authority, let's just say the ISO. But for a common product, I used imbalance reserve. If the ISO for some reason said, look, we're not going to allow imbalance reserve to go above $200 ever in the ISO, period. That could have implications on how imbalance reserves trade elsewhere. And that rule would be under joint authority, even though that rule was specific to the ISO's balancing authority. It applied to a product that was common to EDAM, imbalance reserve up. Okay.
Well, then to follow up on that, why the clause or changes to the formation of? Can you give me an example that doesn't, of an LMP, of something that doesn't directly establish the change, but changes the formation of, so that I can understand the contours of that clause?
Yeah, so that hard cap, I mean, I don't know how they would model it, but that model, instead of the price, let's just say without that rule, it would go to $220. I'm just making things up. It's not it's not directly establishing the price, but it's changing the formation. The formation would have gone to 220, but they put an absolute hard cap in at 200. So now the price formation stops cold when it hits 200. That's what I had in mind.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it for my questions right now. Thanks so much. Oh,
I appreciate those questions, that feedback very much. Did you have anything else, Michelle?
No,
we'll move to the next.
moving on to the next caller.
Hi, Stuart Kelly, LEDWP. First, I would like to say I really welcome the changes we saw over the last 3 slides. I appreciate Jeff and Tony what you're articulating, and obviously it's a balancing act here with these proposed changes. I do wonder why there is a need to tie it solely to aspects that can impact LMP. I would have thought that joint authority should apply to common products that are common, obviously, to WEIM or EDAM, and don't really need the LMP component of the statement in there. And just a follow-up, I understand fully what Tony articulated in terms of CPMR, RMR, RA rules, and to some extent CRR, albeit there's an ITC bit that overlaps there. And I did follow Jeff, the LP export description and why that would be separate. I followed the logic. Are you saying for wheel-throughs, though, that is different because the day-ahead schedules will have a separate priority, and that's the common aspect distinct from wheel-throughs that are not part of EDAM? Is that what you're saying there with the wheel-throughs?
Yeah, well, I'm basing on the ISO's current proposal for EDAM. It's not finalized, but right now there really are sort of very different transactions for the EDAM market, which has transfers. And these transfers are different than outside of EDAM products that go through the ISO and stay outside, that I view as wheel-throughs.
Okay, I'll take that back and consider it as I continue reading the draft final here. I appreciate that explanation, but just to follow up to the first question though, why does it have to, joint authority have to be tied to where it establishes or changes the formation of LMPs? Should it not just be joint authority where it establishes or changes or makes changes to a common product? And in WEIM or EDAM or the KISO markets, do you really need the LMP component there?
I'll take a shot, and others are free to join in. We were trying to really focus on the price formation aspects in tariff rules. Again, sort of because of the arguments of it's a common product, and changing the price of a common product in one area, directly changing it, rules that directly change it, could have impacts in other areas outside of the narrow application of the rule. Some examples on why we didn't want to go further was, let's just say, resource adequacy must-offer rules. These aren't directly changing price formation. They're not establishing prices. These are behavioral rules. And there may be different resource adequacy rules applied to the ISO for, let's just say that the must offer that we currently have, the rule is going to make sure that everyone bids in all capable products. We didn't think it was appropriate to get into sort of RA or must offer rules. And there might be other sort of behavioral type aspects that we really didn't think were transferable to direct trade-off amongst prices. So the RA must offer rule is sort of the first example that comes to my mind. We thought that was out of scope. And by narrowing it to price formation and LMP price formation, we could avoid some of those sort of behavioral or administrative rules. And if anyone else from the GRC would like to.
No, that's helpful, Jeff. We don't need to drag this out. It's helpful to understand that context and the concern you're trying to address, and why you're bringing an LMP to address that concern. I'll take that away and think about it. But thank you.
Thanks. Hey, Stuart, thank you. I appreciate it. And, you know, this is really helpful. And if there's other words in here, we will have a chance to mull over, right? We're trying to stay away from effects, it's something that's so direct, and that was our intent. But if there's other things in the phrasing here, we would benefit from hearing.
Yeah, you know, I really appreciate what the GRC's done here, and I also appreciate the explanation, so it helps me think about it. So thank you.
Okay, next caller. Mary Winkie, I think you're up.
Oh, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So this is Mary Winkie from the Public Generating Pool. And I do want to just echo a little bit of what Stuart just said in terms of this effort, and really do appreciate the sort of needle that is being thread. I have I think a question, a comment, but a question phrased in the form of a comment, perhaps is the best way to put it. But, you know, PGP had suggested some concepts around parity or symmetry, and there was some fair amount of discussion on that the last session of the GRC. And this rule, though, is sort of rooted in the technical application, is a technical rule essentially, and rather than a rule that is more rooted in a principle. Again, I completely understand the desire, the intent of getting away from the sort of impacts or effects test, but I am curious on the choice to kind of create a rule that is more technical in nature rather than kind of rooted in a principle, and does that have to do with the ease with which the rule is applied, or because that principle is not one that the GRC wanted to pursue as far as how this test is formulated?
Sorry, Rebecca, you go.
No, go ahead, Commissioner.
Okay. Mary, thanks for that. From my perspective, when the parity principles really articulated in the next rule about the exclusions, but when we tried to really explore in that public workshop whether there was sort of any space between the applies to and parity, we sort of, folks kept coming back to the CAISO is a funny BA in that it's a market as well as a BA. And so in my mind, this is trying to put a rule around the piece of that unique aspect of the CAISO BA being a market operator also. And so trying to put some more color on the parity principle as opposed to diverging from the parity principle, really trying to put a little more specificity that goes after that dual role that we heard people raising. And so it's a very technical rule, but it's because it's trying to really etch out that what the parity principle really is trying to say. That's my perspective on how we landed on this language. That my colleagues may have a different perspective, though, particularly those that are more technically deep in the tariffs.
I don't think I have anything to add to that. We utilize the concept of the parity principle that you introduced on the September 23rd meeting, Mary, and that was kind of the overarching kind of backstop as we evaluated proposals and concepts for what would be included. So no, it's not expressly articulated as a principle, but we did apply that, and we try to explain that in the proposal, but it was hard to parse out into a specific principle to be specifically applied. And happy to discuss with you further on that, because I don't know certainly if my answer is satisfying, but it was a foundation for our decision.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Okay, looks like we have another question from Michelle Keto.
Hey, so this is just a follow-up on my last one. So I just was listening to what you were saying after I left, and one of the questions I now have is about penalty parameters for transfers, because transfers would be a product that would be common to EDAM. But the thing is, in terms of the parity, other balancing authorities will effectuate their reliability criteria based on their OATs, even in the context of EDAM. It's not my understanding that they're going to have similar penalty parameters. So I just wanted to get your thoughts about where EDAM transfers and penalty parameters for those transfers would go in joint authority. I would say it's excluded, but given this rule, it looks like it would be included.
Hi, Michelle, it's Jeff again. So again, this gets to the very technical issue of exactly what's happening with the penalty parameter, when and where, and what's going on with it. First thing, we're now talking about an EDAM transfer. So now it's in scope from a sort of, it's an EDAM product, right? So it's not something outside of EDAM, so it's in scope from that dimension. And generally the rules for how the EDAM market work are under joint authority. So this gets into some sort of, I'm not sure how the ISO is using penalty parameters for reliability in the EDAM, but it just feels like,
yeah,
yeah, for reliability, back to my, is it being used to form price or is it being used to ration for reliability? So it feels like there may be a theme of reliability parameters being viewed somewhat differently. And I'm sorry, I'd have the ISO speak to exactly where that line is in their EDAM proposal. I can't speak to it.
Well, could Burton Gross speak to it? Because this is pretty important for us. And so the thing is, you basically said that because it wasn't a product, exports and wheels were not a product common to EDAM, but transfers are, that would put it in. But the thing is, once we get to a point where we have to cut something, it was CAISO's, proposal that it would cut transfers equal to load, but it was understanding that that was going to be imposed upon everyone else, or that they had to adopt it because everyone has their own reliability rules. So to me, that should still be excluded from joint authority. Could CAISO weigh in on that for us?
Well, this is Bert. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm familiar enough with the specific proceeding that you're talking about, or the specific rule, and it always matters what the exact rule is in order to be able to answer correctly. So I don't want to create confusion here by guessing. That said, one thing I want to, if we could just go back one previous slide, because we've talked a lot about this additional requirement, but I guess my question would be, and maybe, I don't know, Jeff, if you're familiar enough with these specific proposals to say, but the first question would be, are we talking about a rule that would apply to the EIM entity balancing authority areas in their capacity, or EDAM balancing authority areas in their capacity as participants within the WEIM or the EDAM? Because if you are, then the rule would be subject to joint authority irrespective of this additional rule. It would just be, it's foundational to the point that if you're talking about rules that apply to the EIM or EDM BAs in their capacity as EIM, EDM BAs, then it's joint. So I guess,
Are you talking
again,
about
I don't really want
transfers
to.
now, or are you talking about exports or wheels?
Well, that's why I want to actually see if I can maybe get Jeff or someone who's a little bit more in detail with the proposals. But if we're talking about transfers, I think we're talking about WEIM or EDAM rules, I think.
Yeah, that's my view. On transfers, the ISO is setting up basically a system that says that to the extent that the ISO is not able to support transfers, that it'll pro rata curtail the transfers with California load. And exactly how they're effectuating that, and if they're using penalty parameters or if they're using sort of administrative, I'm not crystal clear. The second dimension is to the extent another balancing authority is not able to support transfers and its load, what is the requirements of EDAM from it? And my understanding is the ISO has proposed as an EDAM rule. It's the same rule that you're expected to curtail whoever you are, your balancing authority load pro rata with your transfer curtailments.
But
So
if the
my
EDM
understanding-
entity doesn't adopt tariff amendments, do that, they still have joint authority over our tariff amendments regarding penalty parameters?
Yeah, so and when it actually comes to curtailments, the ISO is always trying to delineate what the software is telling people to do, which I think falls under its tariff, versus what the balancing authority is actually going to do. The software may be telling another balancing authority that we're expecting, our market is saying that you are not going to get all of your load served and you're going to curtail transfers. That other balancing authority may do that, or that other balancing authority may have some backup supply that's completely outside of the ISO's purview that it initiates or initializes, and it winds up not having to do any curtailments. And that action is completely outside of the ISO's purview. So it's really a complicated question of what is going to be accomplished through the software and what the market is saying the software is going to do, which I think is common and joint. And then it goes into, but what is the balancing authority going to do sort of out of market, which is not common and not joint and not parity or reciprocating or
Jeff,
whatever the word is.
Are you saying that our penalty parameters are going to dictate what other balancing authorities cut?
I'm saying the market is going to tell them what the market is willing to do for them. What they ultimately do is going to be up to them. And sort of the same thing applies to even the ISO. The market is going to suggest what the ISO should be doing. But if the ISO is able to go out of market and get some supply to keep everyone, up and running, the ISO is going to do that rather than just follow whatever the software says was the mathematical.
Except, Jeff, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but PowerX required that CAISO put their penalty parameters in their tariff, and CAISO must abide by its tariff. So I actually think this is a really important question.
So, might I just weigh in here for a observation? First of all, just for what it's worth, I mean, I think these questions are very important, and we need to think through them publicly, not just as we try to hash out a written work product. And so the dialogue is very helpful. I think Bert's analysis is certainly where my head is. Nothing that we did in this latest iteration affects this issue. What we had in the prior configuration, that this was an EDM rule, is what would govern how this is going to be treated. And I think this just goes to the general proposition that it's complicated. People are working this through, and it's just very difficult in a static piece of paper to do a issue by issue decisional classification of where it lands. And then I think we need to remember that this is joint authority, right? So both entities need to approve something.
Yeah. So Yeah, I just want to address that issue. So as you know, the penalty parameters have been incredibly contentious. And California does believe that it affects our reliability and our ability to ration our transmission system. And this under the current applies to test, you're right, it would not fall in that because it didn't fall in, the penalty parameters did not fall in under the existing EIM. And so this is an addition, which expands it. And so I am just trying to understand the contours of this expansion, which could be incredibly important for the reliability for California customers. And I would assume that everyone agrees that that's like an important objective. So I appreciate your comments and your thoughts, and we do really hope that we can get some clarity on these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Let's turn to the next caller, please.
Afternoon, this is Kanya Dorland with the Public Advocate's Office, and I'm just following along with Michelle's identification of two rules that this new change would apply to. I wanted to ask if the CAISO can provide a list of all the rules and policies that this change would apply to.
So at the end of this revised proposal is an illustrative list of what's in and what's out for the apply to test. I'm not sure if you're referring to something other than that, but it was our starting point for the conversation.
Right, there's the applies to test, but it seemed like Michelle was pointing out more things that this rule would apply to beyond what was considered before. So I just want to clarify that list that you've already provided of items that this applies to has not changed. This rule does not expand the scope of the rules that will be governed by joint authority.
Tony?
I think that's a reasonable characterization. If it's an EDM rule, it was before our latest revised draft, and there is this attempted clarification and potentially incremental expansion in the directly change and establish language, which I think, as I just noted, is my view which is I think aligned with what Bert was articulating, that the EDM firmness of transfers was not affected by that last change we did. That was already joint authority.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bearing in mind our time right now, I want to go to the second half of our presentation, and then we can come back to questions and comments after that. Can we advance the slides? Let's go to slide 13. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to walk through the balance of our recommendations. Go ahead, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Could we advance the next slide, please? So when we were looking at different proposals that we could put together, we wanted to see whether we should be making any changes to the governing body, the 5-member governing body. So we looked at a number of different potential changes, and one of the ones that we proposed and we got comments on was whether we should expand the number of people that serve on the governing body. We heard very clearly back from stakeholders that they didn't like that idea, or that they didn't think it was necessary. Some people pointed out that there's 5 members on the governing body, 5 members on the board, and that made some nice symmetry. So we are not proposing that we change the number of governing body members at this time. The next issue we looked at is, we know that as we move to EDAM, that the governing body, the issues, the scope, how detailed the information they're going to have to deal with is going to expand. And so we wanted to consider when someone is up for reappointment on the governing body, are they the right person to move forward and be involved with EDAM? And so we are making a recommendation that the nominating committee, when someone comes up for renewal, if they come up for renewal, should look at the qualifications of that person, should see, is it a good skill fit, time commitment, and that kind of thing. So we want to make sure that we're having appointed the appropriate people to run the governing body or be on the governing body. The third part of this is we're looking for compensation issues. Are we compensating the governing body to be commensurate with other bodies of the same around the country? Are we going to attract competitive candidates if we are paying them enough? We looked at this and we didn't hear very much support for increasing the amount that's being paid right now. So we're putting forward a recommendation that in 2023, there should be an evaluation of the compensation for the governing body members, because maybe it is necessary, but we didn't make that determination. So if we can skip to the next slide, which is a title slide, and then one beyond that. Thank you. So we also wanted to see how else can we enhance stakeholder engagement. We are moving from into day ahead operations, and we want to make sure that we get as robust and comprehensive input as we can. You all know that the stakeholder process that is held by CAISO right now, it's open, it's transparent, anybody can come in, you don't have to pay to participate. And so we are recommending that we're maintaining that current stakeholder engagement process. However, we also know that sometimes there may be very complex or detailed issues that need to be evaluated and input sought. And so we are recommending the limited use of work groups. The example of the work group is the market design. We had months of market design, deep dive work groups. So we know that we don't want to pull on people's time unnecessarily, but feel that when something is complex and needs a lot of input, that we do want to have this higher level of engagement, which is through the work groups. The third bullet on the slide, we talked about developing input from the RIF. So the CAISO has an annual policy roadmap process where they put forward initiatives to be able to be worked on in the coming year. We are putting forward a proposal where the Regional Issues Forum body, which is made up of a number of different sectors of stakeholders for the CAISO, would actually get a briefing from the CAISO staff, and they would get a chance to evaluate the different initiatives that are in the roadmap and provide CAISO with feedback. There's detail in the paper on this, but what we envisioned is that the different sectors would be responsible, or one sector representative would be responsible from understanding what the issues and priorities are from their sectors. And then there would actually be a roundtable meeting held at the very beginning of the initiative process where the sectors could come forward with their input. We envision that the board and the body members would be present. They're not required to be present, but we would think that they'd want to be present. And then there was some input that was given about, well, there should be an ability to do majority or minority reports so that it wasn't just the sector representatives that were giving input. We didn't go that direction. What we thought was better is that if we leave it open and that anybody can give input. So certainly we'll hear from all the sectors, but that doesn't preclude someone else from being from participating in the roundtable and being able to give input. One thing that's not on the slide that I wanted to mention is it came up in comments before about the consumer advocates and public interest sector possibly splitting. We decided that that did not need any change. That wasn't an appropriate recommendation at this time. The two sectors are working to refine the process to work together, so they are going to stay as one sector. But we did hear input from the utilities that they thought it was appropriate that we have a new sector, a new EDAM sector. So we are recommending that the RIF will include an EDAM sector. The trigger for that would be when an entity actually files an implementation agreement with FERC. That would trigger us or the RIF adding an EIM sector. And as it states in the paper, we would add one, and then at some point it'd probably be appropriate to add two. So there will be one new sector in the RIF. And then finally, we just wanted to encourage the RIF to use its advisory authority. The RIF was really constituted to be largely educational. It's moved into more of an advisory role. The RIF has had expanded authority, and so we just want to encourage it to use all of its possible functions to be able to support CAISO and make sure that input from the sectors are reflected back to CAISO staff and the board and the body. Can we go ahead 2 more slides? So the last issue I'm going to cover has to do with the bylaws. The bylaws, as I'm sure you know, are the corporate governance document of the CAISO. We wanted to see whether there were recommendations that could be made to enhance the bylaws, to change the bylaws potentially, to make sure that stakeholders understand that we're looking more regionally, that we want to be able to take input from all kinds of impacted bodies. And so there is a change that has been proposed, and the language, it's not in quotes here, but the language states currently that the corporate purpose is to ensure efficient use and reliable operation of the CAISO controlled grid. We're adding some language, part of which is on the screen, which is that CAISO will, quote, weigh the interests of all stakeholders in the region or in the footprint, unquote. And then it lists who are some of those stakeholders. We carefully chose the word weigh. We had the word consider. We had the word something else I can't remember, but we decided that weigh was the right word because we want to make sure that both the board and the body are considering as greatly as possible all the different stakeholder input. And then we tried to reflect that change as well in for the governors. So the governors themselves, not only does the corporation has to weigh outside interests or all stakeholders, but the governors also have to weigh outside stakeholders and all interests that operate either in EDAM or EIM or in the CAISO BA. So Rebecca, sorry, that was fast, but wanted to run through it.
Thanks, Amanda, and I appreciate you being sensitive to time because we do have, we'll have a little bit of time at the end. I want to hold for Milos to do a quick update. Let's turn to advance it 2 slides, please. So stakeholders posed several questions about the timing and implementation. How is this going to work with adopting a governance proposal before there's market design? We're going to contemplate obviously doing those together, but how does that look and work going forward? So we recommend that, as we understand it right now, that the board and the body will have joint authority over the decision on EDAM market design, so that it's joint authority in consideration of the future of EDAM. The EDAM governance proposal would become effective once FERC has conclusively accepted CAISO's filing on market design. So there's a little bit of a gray area in that timing, but we decided on the clear line that it would be upon FERC acceptance of the filing. So to address any concerns, that it's our anticipation that it will be joint authority reviewing these proposals for market and governance from both bodies. Next slide. I'm just going to wrap this up and then we'll go ahead and go to public comment. We are obviously at November 7th. This is our stakeholder call to discuss our proposal, and we've gotten a lot of feedback, which is appreciated. We have asked that comments are due on November 18th. I know this is a short turnaround time, and we recognize that there's a lot going on with our other efforts with market design, and there's meetings that week. But we do have a tight turnaround to be able to review the comments and to hold a stakeholder call, which we have here November 30th. We haven't finalized that, but that will be when we will hold another meeting of this nature to walk through our proposal. So it's a short turnaround, and I would note that in your comments, try to make your life easier, and just really, you don't need to repeat what you've already proposed in comments, or provide that background. The comment template will be up soon, if not today, and really just hone in on these incremental pieces, and so that you're not overworking. We know that this is a long proposal. We know that there's a lot going on, and so that we can wind this up as quickly as possible. We intend to hold a meeting in early January where the Governance Review Committee will actually vote on our proposal. We'll have our public decision and deliberation, and then this will move to the board and the body for the final proposal for joint authority to the board and the body for their consideration in February. We have 12 minutes left, and I have 2 raised hands in the queue. So why don't we open the line to the next participant? I think it's Jessica.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Jessica Zano, Puget Sound Energy. And I just had a question, Rebecca, about something you just said. It was going into effect upon FERC acceptance of the filing of the market design. And I just want to clarify that by that you mean approval, or that they have received the filing, that they're accepting the filing as filed.
I'll take it.
Go ahead, Tony. I'm looking it up, and I had the answer, and now it has eluded me. Go ahead.
Acceptance is a term of art that is used under the Federal Power Act and for practice, where that's how the commission acts to accept the 205 filing. So it's not receipt of, it's upon order to allow.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Next caller, Michelle Quito.
Hey, this is Michelle. 3 things. We had noted that it would be helpful to have an opportunity to comment after the final proposal, because that would be presumably after we've gotten clarification regarding all of these issues. That's one. Would you guys consider that?
Okay, so on this timeline that we're looking at, we are going to turn around another proposal and receive comment on that at the end of this month, or I don't know if it's going to be November 30th. So you will have an opportunity to provide a comment then. I'm looking at our timeline and seeing what's causing concern.
So let's say I say I'm concerned about all of these penalty parameters, and I raise them, and you don't address them on the stakeholder call or in the final draft proposal. Well, that's going to affect how we feel about the proposal. So can't we have an additional opportunity to comment after the final draft proposal is published?
That's not what we're envisioning at this time. We do have a GRC meeting scheduled in January where we will entertain public comment at that time. I optimistically would like to believe that we can work through the issues that you've raised between now and our next revision that will go out. And after we've seen your written comments. So yes, there will be opportunities within this month, the final GRC meeting. And of course, if you want to take it to the final approval on joint authority in February, I would hope that that's not the case, but we will certainly endeavor to work through these and other issues that stakeholders have raised to ensure we're capturing everything. This is our first rollout of this concept, of certain pieces of this, as you've noted, and we know that we have some work to do. So the feedback today has been constructive and will help us fine tune what we need to do going forward.
Okay, and then secondly, I just want to confirm when you say that it will be effective on acceptance, does that mean that there are EDAM entities? I would think that we would only effectuate this when there are new EDAM entrants. Is that right?
No, and Tony, correct me if I'm wrong here. Acceptance by there's going to be a time between acceptance by FERC and any entities signing an implementation agreement. So these could be working concurrently, but entities are not going to assign or sign an implementation agreement until they're confident in the FERC accepting the proposal or the tariff changes. So I don't think that we're waiting for this to trigger. We need to give some certainty to the entities, the EDAM entities that are interested in joining. Tony,
okay,
can you clarify that? Or does that make?
Yeah, but from California's perspective, to give joint authority before there are actually EDAM participants could be a concern. So I just raised that. And then third, I just wanted to go back to something Tony Braun had said. He had said that the transfers would be included in joint authority. And I disagree, but we, if we can get some clarity on whether the transfers and the penalty prices associated with the transfers would be joint, because it does sort of affect the reliability function, which in the EDAM proposal, CAISO does say each balancing authority has the ability to effectuate reliability and just determine the cut. So I'll go to find that section and I'll put that in my comments as well. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle. Let's turn now to, I think we have a few minutes left for an update from Milos. And I'm looking to see if, there you are. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Milos. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to come on just for a couple of minutes and extend an invitation to both the Governance Review Committee members as well as all stakeholders to join us on November 14th, next Monday, for a EDAM stakeholder meeting on the draft final proposal from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. in the Rancho Cordova Sacramento Marriott, similar to where we had one of the prior stakeholder meetings there, where we're going to focus the stakeholder meeting primarily on the evolution of the proposal from the revised proposal to this most recent draft final proposal that we published. We'll be publishing the agenda tomorrow for that meeting, but the topics that are going to be covered include the resource sufficiency evaluation and evolutions in a couple of areas of design there, certain clarification of the transmission availability, and as well as greenhouse gas accounting design, along with a couple of other smaller topics. So we hope that you all have time to join us. We recognize there's a number of other things going on in the region that particular week. So this meeting is in person, but it also has a virtual option, and we encourage stakeholders, if you're available, to join us as much as you can. So that's all I had. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Milos. We are just short of 3 o'clock at time. Just want to check to see if any governing body members have any issues that they want to raise at this point. I think we've gotten a lot of feedback today. I feel like we have some work to do. But I appreciate everybody's time and attention, and especially to the stakeholders. I know that there's a lot going on right now. Anything from the Governance Review Committee? Okay, I just want to thank my volunteers that helped along today. I really appreciate it. And we will be reaching out to you soon to get more input and fine tune and deliver this proposal by the end of this year. So with that, we're done for today.
Thanks, Rebecca.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.